equity, and justice that define Dr. Dukes' life. This afternoon will be most interesting. Thank you for being here, and let's all welcome.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'll start your recording. I think you're paused.
No, we're recording.
Okay, my screen is paused. All right, so we have a little bit of a concern here, but can everybody see this?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I tried to do full screen. It keeps going back down, so I don't want to cause any problem.
Your screen in the Zoom app?
It's sharing?
Well,
Where it should be.
Sharing screen, and then you pick the app that you want to share.
Yeah.
There. That should, no, that should get rid of the menu bars. But no, now you got to go to full screen here in your PowerPoints.
Yeah, I won't see how it does it.
It
It doesn't like it. So for some reason, we're just gonna go like this. And I think we will.
Yeah.
So I'm going to talk to you today about virtual reality for disaster preparedness. Basically, because of my varied background in electrical engineering and fire and emergency management, I'm trying to pull all of those things together. In 2020, around 2020, a couple of colleagues and I started thinking about the idea of using VR to help people understand their risks to disasters. We felt like the immersive environment would be helpful. Right now, if you go to most emergency managers' offices, they'll give you a pamphlet that you might read, and then you may lose. And then you may not have it when it's the actual time for a disaster. But in the literature, it talks about how individuals who have previously been through disasters seem to have some stored knowledge of what to do. And so we wanted to see if we can mimic that with something a little bit more safe. What you see here are pictures from our experiments. We've actually created a game around disaster preparedness. We have IP that has been disclosed to UAlbany and is on its way being filed through the patent office. We are using eye tracking software within inside of the VR to collect data that we can then put into the modules that we have on preparedness writ large. And we've done about 46 experiments so far. And we have completed these here in Albany, in New York City, and Brooklyn, in Atlanta, Georgia, and in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. So the key points that I have today that I'm going to talk to you about is that there is a connection between our use of technology and our well-being. There's also a misconception regarding the willingness to adopt technology as we age, and there's a change required in the early technology stage. We are living longer. Because of that, that means we're going to be in disasters probably more often. And we have noticed that older adults outnumber children by nearly half in 2024. And older adults tend to live along the coastline and in areas that are most likely susceptible to some of our frequent hazards. So because of those reasons, we wanted to test our software out with older adults first as among one of the more vulnerable populations. Also, people tend to think older adults don't like technology, which is not the case. They also tend to think that something like virtual reality, how are you going to get people in it? No one's going to want to do it. And we haven't found that to be the case either. It's really about training and having more information, hands-on experience with it. Someone walking you through it, that we've had success in most of our participants going through the training. There have been challenges in terms of the elder care, social isolation and loneliness, economic disparities, and vulnerability to disasters and climate impacts. We've noticed that there's a difference in terms of income. You can see the income gains have not been the same since the early decades. And it has actually changed. I think I have the wrong slide set up, but well, I'll just keep going because it's not the one I was expecting. We also have billion-dollar weather and climate disasters that are multiple in each state. So in each of our US states, we have at least 2 hazards that have conflicting preparedness information. So for example, you may live in the Midwest where you're susceptible to both flooding and tornadoes. what do you do in a flooding to prepare is different than what you do for a tornado to prepare. And so understanding that means that we can't keep looking at disaster preparedness in a siloed fashion, whereas we look at it in terms of what preparedness measures writ large you have done. So if I asked you guys, how many of you all feel like you're prepared for a disaster? Which disaster are you prepared for? Is the next question. And so you can kind of see these are just the billion-dollar weather and climate disasters as of 2024. And we've had a number of them. Included in here are a lot from New York, even though it looks like it's concentrated in the middle. That includes winter weather disasters, flooding, and hurricane impacts, which are happening along the coast. This is just another evidence of the same thing that we are actually seeing in every way that we can measure it, increasing disasters over time, increasing in terms of the amount of money that we're spending out for our disasters. And so what you see here are in the billions of dollars. So we've gone from somewhere less than $58 billion to now over $517 billion that we're spending out after disasters. The other way you can see this is the number of events. And so we started out in 1980 at less than 4 events over the entire year that reached billion-dollar status. And now in 2024, we had close to 26 billion-dollar disasters across the United States. And that doesn't include the ones that are just million-dollar disasters, right? The other thing you can see is that, like, if we could just look at the green across here, because you can clearly see that the green is growing over time. The green represents the severe storm count. So the number of times we've had a severe storm warning has increased over time. If you look at the yellow, you can see the tropical cyclone count, which includes things like hurricane. We've also had a pretty steady line of drought the entire time, which is that mustard cover that's going on the bottom. So we've been tracking how many billion-dollar disasters, and the idea that we can't think about disasters or we don't need to think about disasters as much isn't going away. We can kind of see that through the numbers. I want to say UN, so this is the UNDRR, which is the United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction, has created a game, Disaster Games, to try to get people to understand what their risks are. We have a private company that created Disaster Mind to try to get people to think about their disaster risk. And what you have here at the bottom is actually a FEMA game that is located online to get people to think about, actually kids, to think about disaster risk. And so the concept of using games to increase preparedness is not new. We've been doing this over time. It's happening locally in the US, and it's also happening internationally. And we've already moved from traditional board games, which if you're interested in playing some of those board games, I do have them on campus. But we also have moved into more of the digital space. And so the first thing I was thinking is that most of these games are either geared towards emergency management professionals or specifically through K through 12 kids. So you're not getting the adults to actually participate. And what do we need to do to make that happen? On this slide, I was showcasing to you that the way in which we think about technology influencing our lives should not be as a luxury anymore. We have created an entire book around COVID, and it shows that starting a little bit before COVID, but enhanced during being in social isolation environment, that we've seen the use of technology kind of explode among all demographics and across all sectors. And one of the things that has come out of that is through the healthcare literature is the idea of technology as a super social determinant of health. And the fact that we have social determinants of health, which include economic stability, neighborhood and physical environment, education, community safety in the social context, and as well as the healthcare system. But the idea now is that technology influences every single one of those pillars, and your inability to access either the digital information or have the proper hardware actually limits you in your ability to really fully engage in the entire societal level. And so you can see that coming up with healthcare. Right now in New York, you have information that they're giving to you on your phone, that you can actually see your all of your numbers. You can see when your next healthcare appointment is. You can actually do telehealth and telemedicine with them. And that has increased your ability to access the healthcare environment. If you took that away, that would limit your ability to access at this point in time. The same thing is happening with education. The same thing is happening with understanding your neighborhood environment. I don't know how many of you guys have a Ring camera or any of those safety features on your houses now, and now you're connecting to your neighbors in a different way. And you're seeing when there's a missing dog, when there's somebody nefarious in the area. You're also hearing about fire and the like. That's increasing your neighborhood environment, your connection to your neighborhood in a way that we didn't have before. And so now that digital access, digital literacy, accessibility of hardware and hardware features, as well as the privacy and security of that, is an overlay of the super social of social determinants of health, making it a super social determinant of health. And with that, it affects your health outcomes, including mortality, morbidity, life expectancy, but we're also seeing your disaster resilience. And so with that, we're trying to incorporate this idea of leveraging what we have to increase people's awareness is only going to be for the better. And it's just another tool in our toolbox. You can still get the pamphlet, you can still go through a workshop, but you can also do something else that would maybe stick a little bit more. So we are, what I'm going to present to you is about Proactive, which we have an NSF grant for. And it was to refine a concept and an idea that we have in using the virtual reality headsets, creating a game around the headsets that would test people's preparedness levels across multiple hazards. And we wanted to extend some of the models and theories around disaster preparedness. We also have information science professors, psychologists with us. We had gerontologists that were working with us and the like. And so we also have overlaid this idea of trying to identify reasons why people might adopt a technology or not adopt a technology. In this instance, explaining to people that older adults would use virtual reality and actually using the theories to prove it. We had software developer and designer from Superluminal, which is a local Capital Region 3D design company. We had undergraduate students. One of our major undergraduate students here is Ed Boulay, who is in the middle. And we had graduate students like Masa Gadarzi, who's still here with her PhD to help us do this entire assignment. We started out with a nationwide survey. We did the nationwide survey. I don't think that's me. We did the nationwide survey over 3 years. We have 2 years worth of data, which we've already collected. And the third year, we're actually analyzing now because it was put out in December 2025. And the survey was to establish something that we already knew to be true from FEMA surveys, but to get a little bit more data from them. And it was about disaster preparedness across the nation. What do people see and understand about their disaster preparedness? What do they feel like they're prepared for? And where do they feel like they need help? The other thing we wanted to ask them was their willingness to use different technologies to help them with their disaster preparedness, which was an addition. We had over 1,600 responses over both years. And then we had a demographics of at least up to 15% of older adults, which we identified as 65 and older. And we were really trying to get the people with disabilities, which is close to 30% on one of the surveys. And so we worked with hand in hand with older adults and people with disability organizations. And so that's how we came up with that. So some of our findings: older adults are frequent use of AI-driven technology, especially those who are 55 years and above. And you can see here, we did it. Blue would be anybody who's actually adopting, and red is never. And so we have VR headsets, robots, smart cars, generative AI. Generative AI being things like ChatGPT or Claude or any of those things that you're typing in, getting the answer from. We did that for both surveys, and you can kind of see where most people had never used it, right? They never or very rarely or rarely use these technologies. Then we wanted to check the comfort level in using these technologies. And the comfort is actually different. They may have not used it, but they feel comfortable, like if they wanted to, maybe they could potentially pick it up. And so some felt extremely comfortable, others felt somewhat comfortable, and you can see that increasing from 2023 to 2024. Around that same time frame is where you see the pickup in using ChatGPT a lot more. And so that's part of it. People have been exposed to it more. And then willingness to use AI-driven technology, same group of people over 2 surveys. And you see now there's a lot more blue happening. That means there's more strongly agree, more somewhat agree with the willingness to use any one of these technologies, being 55 and above. We ask these 3 separate questions because a lot of times you'll get this question, which gives you it paints a picture that older adults are not using these technologies and would not use these technologies, but they may not have been exposed to using it. They may have not had a reason to use it yet. Their comfort level is not connected to their ability or willingness to use. And their willingness to use a technology seems to be almost in line with younger adults and their willingness to use a technology that they haven't used before. And these results from our survey actually mirror that from AARP. AARP does an annual survey on the use of technology by older adults, which is separate from their disaster survey. And they found the same thing, that it's increasing with older adults, that they want to use these technologies and they have some key things that would help them to use it. And it's training around the technologies, and it's having someone to answer their questions when they come into trouble. So we took that and said, hey, older adults will use these technologies. We're going to build something with them in mind. So we used a user-centered design to start designing our internal structure for the disaster game. We had ideas from our theories about what we should include, but we wanted to make it more accessible and comfortable for older adults when they got in. So these are some of the screenshots. If you notice, the screenshots look kind of like an animated design, and we used low fidelity. We could have went with real world experiences, but then we would have inserted the concept of trauma into our experiment, in which we wanted to more explore the possibility of it being used widely. So we used low fidelity animation on purpose because we wanted to just test what people were doing and collect data, and to get you kind of excited about the idea. So what you have in the top left is the bedroom, and then you have the hallway, 2 shots of the bathroom. On the lower level, you have the kitchen/dining area, and then if you turn around, you will see the living space. And you can also look out the windows of this 1-bedroom household environment that we've put together. So this is a close-up of what the kitchen looks like inside. Each one of the objects there you can pick up and turn around. You can actually throw some objects and see it crash. So we had a lot of people do that. And then the bedroom hallway, you can kind of walk through, and you can see the controllers in here. That's what these 2 things are. So you would be holding 2 controllers as you're walking through the space, and you can see that, and it will orient you. At the top here, you can see where it looks like a little challenge coin is what we've created inside of the environment. So as people are exploring, we want them to collect the coins. That became a real big hit for some reason, that people just liked collecting the coins as much as they could. We only had one person get through to collect all the coins, but they really liked that feature in the game. And then in the bathroom. And so we hid the coins everywhere possible so that you'd get a chance to really explore the space. It also mimicked the idea that you're walking through your household environment and kind of taking your mind off the fact that you're here for a disaster experiment. And so as they're walking around trying to get the coins, then something is happening outside. And so then that's when the game kind of starts to play into the theories, and we can test out certain things. So outside for the, we had 2 different types of scenarios. One was a chemical spill, and the other was a hurricane that was getting ready to start. And so outside you would see it look nice, and then all of a sudden you can kind of see some rain occurring. It starts to get really windy. The trees are moving in other houses. You can see what's happening outside, and you have some decisions to make at that point. I don't know what happened. It's not letting me change my slide. That's okay. So I hinted to the theories. These are the theories that we began testing. And I was hoping that this would be a little bit bigger for you guys, but with inside the blue is what we call, yes?
Just like a little line at the bottom with a red thing, was that it? Expect.
Yes. No, that would zoom in a little bit
Yeah.
more. Is that a little bit helpful? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so this is the theory. So the inside the blue is the protective action decision making model. And I'm going to go through it for you. So up here, you have environmental cues, social cues, information sources, channel access and preference, warning messages, and receiver characteristics. And according to this model, it says that when you get a warning message and you're getting ready to make decisions, the first thing people will do is look for environmental cues, which is things like looking outside. So you get a message on your phone, and then the first thing you do is like, oh, it's snowing. Let me go look outside and see if it's snowing. Or, oh, it's a hurricane. Let me go outside and look and see if it's a hurricane. Or there's a chemical spill. What does that look like outside my door, right? So that's what people tend to do. And so that's why we have you inside, but you can clearly see outside, and there are things that are happening outside. The next is social cues. So if you're like doing a tornado and you hear the sirens and you look outside and all your neighbors are packing up and leaving, that gives you some indication that maybe I should be leaving too. So you're looking at what's happening with your neighbors. For some people, that weighs heavily. Other people, it doesn't weigh as much. Maybe it's someone calling them, like a loved one, in which their loved one saying, hey, you need to get out of there. I just saw this thing on the news. And that's a social cue, someone telling you that this is happening. The information sources is where you would get your more official notifications from. And so inside the VR game, we have a wireless emergency alert that appears on the phone. So that's whenever you get a message that's coming on your cell phone. We also have the emergency alert system, which occurs on the television. And so that will happen. We also have a NOAA weather radio, which a lot of people do not have in their households, but I recommend everyone get one. And we have a number of different ways for you to pick out where you want to hear the message first. So you will hear a sound and then you get a request. Which place do you want to receive this message from? And so now we're collecting which information source is primary to you. Then we have channel access and preferences. Where are you getting all the next set of information? So if you go to your cell phone, you get the wireless emergency alert. Do you also look at social media to see what they're saying on social media? Do you call your family and friends on there? Do you want to see that note again? Do you go to your TV? Do you want to see what the anchorman is saying instead of the emergency alert system? And so those are some of the decisions that you're making. We're able to capture in real time what you're doing as you're doing it. And then the warning message itself. For us, we did not want to get into the weed on the warning message. Actually, there's another person you can invite here who does all the warning messages and helps out, which is Jeanette Sutton. And she's my colleague in CEHC. And she's kind of nationwide known to help all emergency managers with crafting the perfect message. So she looks at the content of the message that's going to make you understand the importance of what's happening. And so we asked her to create our messages for us with inside of the game so that that can be our constant and control. And so we weren't getting in the weeds of, did they even understand the message? And then the receiver characteristics, that means who you are. How many disasters have you previously been through as you're walking through this space? Where you typically live. Sometimes, well, age and demographic information flows into that. And so that's connected to this pink area here, which is the social vulnerability theory, which states that some people are more likely to listen to disasters, and actually it tends to be more women than men going after and doing things around disaster management because of I don't know. I think there's all kinds of theories on why, but typically it tends to follow that men feel like they're the protectors and have to go out and do stuff. And so they're kind of going against the grain sometimes. And women are trying to protect the children or caregiving and things like that. And so we see that as a unique spread that's happening in the literature. So within this theory, it basically helps us identify your protective action decision making. And then in our testing, we also wanted to test the cognitive experiential learning theory, which means that if I tell you to go through our experiment using facts alone, does that differ than if you use emotion alone? And so we were asking people, we have a randomized sample of our folks that some were going through only on their emotions and some were going through only on the facts that were given to them. And then wrapped around this is this purple model, which is the technology acceptance model. And that's where before and after someone went through the experiment, we asked them questions about their use of VR and their willingness to use VR in the future to capture whether or not there was an acceptance of this technology for this particular idea. All right. I don't know what's happening. All right, so here are some of our experiments. We not only got a chance to go through 4 different cities to host these experiments, but we've been invited to 2 different disaster preparedness fairs. We went to one in Schoharie County at request of the emergency manager there. And we also went to one in San Mateo County in California to present and showcase that. And so what you see in the top right corner here is us at the Schoharie County Fair, which was only about disaster preparedness. And we put all different age groups inside of the VR game. And that wasn't part of our experiments, but that was just so that it could get out there. There were about 2,000 people at that fair. And so it's a pretty large county and it was really pretty well received. And there is a YouTube clip about just our experience with this project that was put on through the university communications group. They traveled with us to Brooklyn and took a lot of footage there. So then what did we find? Our attitudes towards technology use. So what you see here is, and I don't know, this is, hopefully you can see it a little bit better. But basically all the red is when people strongly disagree. All the blue is when people agreed. And it's about whether or not technology works like the mind works, whether or not technology is a burden to themselves, whether or not technology is a burden to their family, if they've previously had a bad experience with technology, if they consider themselves technologically savvy, if they felt like they use it to gain more knowledge, if they felt like it wasn't necessary in their life, if they felt shameful when they're using it and asking other people for help, and if they felt that it included some convenience in their life by using technology. And so these are the responses pre and post test after taking our experiment. Then we had behavioral intention, which was a question about the behavioral intention to use the game for disaster preparedness, the behavioral intention to recommend the game, if they would use it more if it was on a computer or a phone as opposed to the virtual reality platform, if they felt like they would purchase a game, and then if they wanted to use it if it was free or if it was purchased. And you can see no one wants to purchase virtual reality. Virtual reality headsets are about $300 to $500, and none of our participants wanted to purchase the virtual headset. But if it was free, they would take it. Right? Which indicates to us that the cost is a barrier. That's how we're getting down to whether or not cost is a barrier to it, or if they just don't like this technology. And you wouldn't want something free even if you didn't like it, right? So that's where that comes in. VR itself, if they like it, and then VR for disaster preparedness and whether they would recommend it again. The next thing we asked was about the perceived ease of use. And this is important because while they may want it, whether or not they found it easy to use. And through our experiments, we've already determined that we're going to change some of the functionality. They have given us ideas on changing this. It would be nice if you could do it this way. And so that's where we started changing some of the design features. But basically, a lot of people, most people said that they thought it was better for learning. And this was right after taking it. They thought it helped them. They had a desire to use it. They thought it was going to help them with their skill set, and they thought it was great as a VR game. And so where you see these purple arrows that I have here is where we found some significance in our findings, and that it was a drastic difference right after taking or being immersed in that environment, that most of our older adult participants felt there was an easier time using it. Now, I think can clearly say about 90% of the time, every person got is like, I've never used this before and I don't want to mess up your experience. That was almost a common thing. And it's like, it was created for people who never used VR before. We only came across maybe one or two people who have used VR before, and they've used it for different kinds of gaming and the like. So I do have some more really cool statistical information to show you here, which is that we did a path analysis on the TAM model alone, because right now that's the data that we have from the pre and post test of the game. We're still analyzing a lot of the timing and eye tracking within the game. So this shows us that the use and comfortability with technologies is directly associated with the usefulness of using emerging technologies for disaster preparedness, and that the usefulness was related to their attitude towards using the technology, as well as their willingness to use technologies for emergency preparedness. And all of that fed into actual use. And what we see here is that each one of these blue ones are with a 99% confidence level in our findings, right? But the use of technology alone did not change their attitudes towards using the technology, and the attitudes alone would not change their willingness to use the technology. It was about the perceived usefulness for a particular task. And that actually was hand in hand with what AARP was finding in terms of using various types of technologies, in which they said technologies that are used for health and well-being were more likely to be used by older adults and more seen as useful to them. So you're not necessarily wanting to use technologies just for the sake of, I'm going to pick up a new technology. You had to see it as useful for that particular space. And so we were finding the same thing in that emerging technologies, all those AI-driven technologies I showed you before, seem useful to older adults when it came time for disaster preparedness. So that would have fallen in line with their health and well-being from the AARP study. Now, our looking at virtual reality with older adults is not in a vacuum. We looked across all different disciplines and found that virtual reality has been used successfully and constant with older adults. It's supposed to help prevent falls in healthcare. They have an immersive learning that has been created to enhance the experience of older adults. There's one on a puzzle-based virtual reality game that's doing well with older adults. Emotions and well-being to help people who are living with dementia. They've already created virtual reality games for that. And then they're saying that virtual reality games has already started to see a boost in cognitive function for older adults. And so in the literature across other fields, we're seeing them leverage what's happening with, or the potential for virtual reality with older adults. And that's part of the reason why we used it, because we're like, I wonder if this would translate into disaster preparedness. We didn't only do that. We went to National Hurricane Conference down in Orlando, and we Tried to see what our emergency managers thought of the game as well. Do they think that this would be useful for people? And most of the emergency managers had never used virtual reality in their life, and they were curious. So we sat them down in a 3-hour workshop and stepped them through everything we did in terms of the design of the game. And during that 3-hour workshop, we allowed each of them to sit in our virtual reality game for at least 5 minutes and use it themselves. And they were all impressed, which is kind of unusual. So we had over 40 plus people in that seminar. We asked them to identify where they were from. And so what you see here on the map are the locations of the emergency managers. A lot of them, even though we were in Orlando, everybody in there was from New York and from South Carolina. We also had over 10 states represented and 2 countries, including Canada and Jamaica, who were there. And they all took the survey and said that it was at least moderately useful for emergency management, with 10% of them saying moderately useful. Over 50% of them clicked that they thought it would be extremely useful for emergency management. We have a gaping hole in our knowledge around preparedness. When you go on to FEMA's website, you'll see that it tells you to build a kit. It tells you to get insurance. It tells you to do all these things, board up your windows in terms of this, or get crouched down under a table in terms of that. And what we don't know is any weighting on which one of these things is better for you than others. There is no weighting. There's not even a weighting on a weight scale in terms of what would be better to pack in your bag. Is it more important for you to have water, or is it more important for you to have some tablets that may make water clear? Like, we don't have any of that. We don't know if you have a can opener, is that better than if you have a first aid kit? Like, we just tell people, here, put all these things, but everyone doesn't have the same stuff in their bag. And when we ask about disaster preparedness, we just ask blankly, do you have a bag, right? And so those things are causing a little bit of confusion when it gets down to what is actually going to make people more prepared and for what disaster. And here's an avenue for virtual reality to do something that reality can't do. We can't put you all through several disasters and see which ones work best. That would be inhumane. Unless we can find out that you've been through several disasters and ask you what you had in your bags, but then we will be requiring on your memory of each disaster. And so virtual reality space opens up the door to actually putting people through different potential hazards to see what their thought process is and what happens afterwards, which would give us some ideas. And so that's what this game is actually going to do. It's going to put people through each scenario. We only started with the 2 to prove that there was a difference. And we can prove that there is a difference in the way people think about a chemical spill and a hurricane. The next step for us is to create wildfire. When we went over to California, they were really excited about the game, but they were really like, why don't you have a wildfire? Right? So we can test that. So wildfire is next. The other thing is looking at earthquakes and tornadoes so that we can capture all parts of the US. So some of the things that we found is that training is increasingly necessary. If you're not familiar with some of these places, Cyber Seniors, Senior Planet, or Senior Tech Training, that helps older adults with using different technologies. But what AARP studies is showing, what our study is showing, is that there is a willingness and a desire to use different technologies, especially if you think it's going to help your well-being. But there is a disconnect in terms of how much training is offered, how much access to the individuals that can help you is missing. And so these are some of the, I'll push that up for you so you get that last one. These are some of the, let's say, organizations that have kind of developed because they see this need. And that need started earlier in COVID. So during COVID, there were a number of nonprofits that started up, a lot of them by high school students that were hanging out with their grandparents and saying, hey, we can start a nonprofit business just helping older adults navigate how to get the vaccines on this website or how to do their grocery shopping, right? And that's where some of this came from. We have another line of research that's looking at the privacy and security as older adults adopt some of this technology. And we realized that there are some perceptions about using different emerging technologies. And it's access to private information, unauthorized sharing, data ownership, anxiety regarding spam, and the lack of transparency, but that some technologies are easier to use than others. Anything that's asking to share, like your image or your video or camera, is where older adults kind of turn off. So even if it's in the same, like, I would say, same category of technologies, if it's asking for these things, we see a turnoff from a lot of older adults. And so that has actually helped us to identify another theory in which we could kind of expand upon. And that's from information science, in which they just lumped the technologies together. And so we're saying that you kind of have to separate it by what the technologies are doing. And that hasn't been done before. So the realities that we found is that technology can impact your economic stability, access to healthcare, social connectedness, ability for continued learning, and interactions with government and neighborhood. Older adults may not be the frequent users of technologies, but they're willing to under certain conditions. Health and well-being is ranked high among the AI-driven technologies used. And then cost and ease of use, comfort, usefulness, safety, and training are among the major barriers for AI-driven technology use among older adults. We have about 5 more slots for us to finish our experiments. If anybody is interested in joining in, we are giving out $50 gift card compensation for completing the experiment. And then we have a $30 subsequent gift card if you do our 6-month post-test. And so it's about an hour inside the experiment itself. We split that up into 3 different 5-minute sessions. So you're not in the virtual reality for an hour. And it includes training. So there's a tutorial and then the two scenarios. You have to live in the US, be at least, we've actually changed it, 60 years and older. You have to be able to provide your own consent, self-identified as having language proficiency of 8th grade level or above, have at least 20/70 vision and unrestricted field of view, and no astigmatism, a specific type of astigmatism that kind of prevents anyone from using virtual reality. And we also have, just so that it's more comfortable for everybody, if you know you have severe motion sickness, we've noticed a lot of times people are a little bit more nauseous or queasy because it's a different environment. We do know that queasiness goes away as you continue using it, but it's usually jarring for people because it's kind of the same feeling of having that motion sickness. So if you have severe motion sickness, you would. But this is another avenue for you. As always, this is a NSF grant, so I do have to showcase that acknowledgement that this is supported by NSF, but the opinions, findings, and conclusions are not from them. This was a joint group, so it is led by UAlbany, but I also include some of my Georgia Tech folks and Minnesota State University at Mankato folks. And then that last one is Superluminal, who's become a pretty cool partner with us. They've been with us the entire way, and they're super excited by the work that we're doing here. My research lab, like I mentioned, it was mentioned earlier, we look at a number of different things, including racial and ethnic minorities, people with disabilities. We look at AI, Internet of Things, social media. We started looking at personal intelligence devices. We have another grant for AI literacy among older adults that we have ongoing. And I saw a squinch when I said personal intelligence devices. Anybody have Alexa or use Siri? That's those things. So we're trying to see how those might be able to help people with their disaster awareness. And we're funded by a number of different groups, including, yes, we still have NSF and NSF COPE. We do still have one NIH grant that's ongoing. Our FEMA and Homeland Security grants have already finished. So we just got past all of that. And thank you. So I'm opening up to questions. I hope this is a good Time for you to- Yes,
I'm a experimental social psychologist,
okay,
and I was very pleased to see that you are actually using a form of experiment. I am so accustomed to the social sciences with almost everything being some sort of survey questionnaire.
yes.
And that's very unreal
Mhm.
in that you're outside the situation, you're trying to imagine yourself in the situation, even writing that what's called vignette studies.
Yes,
Right, say, imagine yourself in the
Yes.
situation. Is still, you actually referred to this point here, it's like whether you're recalling it and do you recall it correctly? And your mind always reorganizes things as you go along.
Mhm.
It is so much better to actually put people into either you can't put them into the actual situation, create the flood or the tornado. But you can simulate that reality. And in the work that I did throughout my career, that was always really important. Rather than simply telling somebody something or showing them something, a pamphlet or whatever, you actually create a situation that mirrors the kind of circumstances they would want in reality. And I think that's a much more powerful way of learning the things that you need to learn. So thumbs
Thank
up.
you. Thank you so much. We're focused on the preparedness because, and I showed you the screenshots because everybody says disasters in a virtual reality. Like, I don't want to do that. And it's like, it's all the things that happen before the disaster hits. So you start to see the changes in the weather, you start to see the plume of what's happening, but you don't have to actually experience it. It's less traumatic, but we're still capturing all the needed data about how you prepare. Ideally, we would want to go up to response and maybe even into recovery phases of disaster. But at this point, there's so much unknown in the preparedness. We could stay right here and do it across every single hazard and still have so much more information to provide. And all of our participants really appreciated that. They first were nervous that they were going into a disaster and like, I'm supposed to do this and run around, but it is a seated environment and you're really, it's more cognitive. It's more thinking about what are you going to do and what order you're going to do it and how are you making your decisions is what we're really
I
looking
think the
at.
clearest sign, kind of unfortunate that this is a sign, but the clearest sign that the people really were in that reality was the person who was getting nauseous.
Yes.
I mean, you don't want all of your subjects
No.
to get nauseous, but it is that really tells them that was real.
Yeah. And it is jarring. And as much as you see the 2D images, I promise you, it is nothing like getting inside the headset. Everyone has almost the same reaction. That it's the image from the lady on the front, where she's just like, "Oh, wow," because you're turning around. And you can't believe, like, my son, I put my son in it just so he can see, and he's like really young, he's 5, but he says, I'm inside the computer. And that's what it feels like. You're looking, and it's like you can turn around completely and see everything. So it is a fully immersive environment. You almost feel like you're inside. And so it's pretty cool. But you can kind of see it on her face. She's just like, oh, wait, what is this? And the minute you see it, just everyone, and it's still animated, but it still feels so real. Like it's really good. Yes.
Thank you for this. It was amazing. 2 questions.
Yes.
How much tutorial do people get before they actually start
Mhm.
the game? And number 2, because those are like, they require 2 kind of like remotes.
Mhm.
How did the disabled population, like someone like myself,
Mhm.
how did you navigate that if they can't do both remotes?
So we started to learn. Okay, so the first question was, I'm gonna start with your second question because I was okay. The second question is about the remotes, and so that's one of the things that we were starting to change is how to use the remotes, and it wasn't just with mobility or dexterity issues. It was also with anybody who had arthritis and were having trouble with it. So some people were using these arthritis gloves, and our students actually helped them and sat with them, and they would tell us where to go, and then we would move people around. And that's how we got around because we didn't have that before going into the game. But there are virtual reality in which you can tell it to move. We're just experimenting with the ones using the handset. So you would be able to use it just fine by moving your hand. Like you can see your hands inside the environment. So we could make it so you could just, yep. Yep.
Pick it.
Yes. So it's still accessible, but the way that we're testing it for control is a little bit limiting, and that's what we noticed. And so we're also going to change all of these little features to be able to do that. Your first question was,
The tutorial.
oh,
Because I know that if I don't get it, I get frustrated.
right. So one of the things we learned from all of those different virtual reality uses with older adults in other disciplines was limiting the time period, the initial time period that you're in VR helps you to gain more confidence in using it, and also helps to limit the amount of nausea or dizziness that you have. And so the sweet spot is 5 to 8 minutes. So we created our experiments to be 5 to 8 minutes for each time with inside of the game. And that included the tutorial. The tutorial is with inside the game. So you're putting on the headset and you're actually putting together a disaster kit as your tutorial. As you're learning how to move the materials, then you'll go into the actual space. And it's been very helpful. A lot of people liked it, but we found that our tutorial was actually harder than the game. So a lot of people felt like the game was a lot easier. It's like, oh, I can't do this. And then they got into the game and they were like, oh, this is so much easier. So we're going to rearrange our tutorial because we didn't realize it was such a difference in terms of skill.
I suggest that the real disaster for a lot of people is not knowing what to do.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So do these virtual headsets, they have ear audio also?
Yes, you can hear through it.
So, but I don't see earbuds on.
It doesn't, because you can, it's not through your ears. It's like right on the top here is where you would hear. And so we can hear it outside too, what you're
No,
hearing.
because I recently purchased a surround sound $500 computer. And it's a surround, it's an amazing thing. When you put this on, it's like if someone can knock the door behind your head, you actually, just to the audio.
Oh, wow.
You think that and it's an amazing 3D sound
To put
headphone, and the sound, I guess I'm wondering, does this, I was expecting a full headset.
No, yeah,
You're talking
these-
to give you that 3D audio experience too, where if there's a window breaking
yeah,
in the back room, you'll
look
around
behind.
to hear it, but I don't think that is allowed by.
We did manipulate the sound so that if something was happening behind you, it would appear or feel that way to you. We manipulated, so wherever, from the audio alone. So we went into and changed our game up. We inserted sound. We found a lot of AI tools to help us create the sounds that we were looking for, and put them inside the game and then change where spatially it was.
Okay, that's cool.
But you can hear it. It's just, no, it's not the 3D like surround sound here, but it's because these headsets, we've just bought them from Oculus Quest or MetaQuest. And you can get them for like $300 to $500. They're MetaQuest Pro, and they stopped making them while we were doing this. They're actually discontinued now. But the reason why we use those is because that's the only one that Meta makes that has the eye tracking that we wanted. But we've picked up Vive, which is a whole nother headset by HTC. And it's actually lighter on your head, and we really like that one. And so we're trying to make sure that our game works on that as well, and we'll use that later on.
I'm a little curious, just, I have grandkids that, it looks like a lot of these walking through the house, I'm seeing them play these games on the TV, just with a TV
Yes.
and a controller.
Mhm.
And they're walking around rooms, turning around, they're doing everything. And it strikes me that you could just have all of these games on a flat screen.
Yes.
Right?
And so that was-
What I'm
Mhm.
curious about, have you compared
Mhm.
the same tutorial, just, hey, we're gonna give you a flat screen, we want you to go through a house and do whatever you do in a disaster, and now try it just with a screen and the controller versus the headset and the controller. Have you compared the two there?
So we have not compared the two. Other researchers have. Other researchers have compared watching a movie on something, or like a screen of a tutorial for disasters, or putting someone in a headset, or giving them a workshop, and then testing their learning of the material. And it is dramatically improved with a headset versus any of the other two. Now, that's a step above. The 2D is a step above just doing like what I'm doing now, like lecturing or telling people what's going on. But you get a lot more when the immersive environment. It's sort of the same idea, like, is it better if someone tells you to not put your hand on a stove Is it better if you has seen a video of somebody putting their hand on the stove and getting hot, like, oh my gosh, it burns? Or is it better if you simulated an environment, a safe environment in which something happens, like you get a shock, and then you're like, oh my gosh, one sticks with you better than the other. And so the immersive environment is what we think will stick with people better based on previous studies. And they're using virtual reality in other nations. So Japan is like way above us in using virtual reality for disaster preparedness. They've been doing it since the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami in 2011. And they've been doing it with K through 12 kids to increase the resilience of kids during disaster. Like, do you know what to do if it's flooding? They put them in both augmented and virtual reality, and they're actually using real images. So it looks like you're in like they could put you in this exact space and then make water. It looks like it's flooding around you. And that's what they're putting the kids through. And that's where they're testing a lot of this stuff. So yes, you've been waiting patiently.
Thank you for your, that's great. It sounds like you've developed a pretty powerful proof of concept.
Yes.
Is the right word for it?
Yes.
So where do you take it from here?
So as of earlier this month, no, late last month, we now have a company. We founded a startup company here on campus, and that company is going to help to develop this as a technology that can be used by emergency managers, since we had such a high interest in it. We've also been through a couple of the NSF I-Core programs, which is where they help you with customer discovery, trying to figure out how to take your stuff from the research lab into doing a tech transfer, kind of taking it into the commercialization space. And so now we have a company that is now trying to build out the full-on game to create this and be able to offer it, because I think the real money is in the data that we are collecting from it. And so we'll have both the game that'll be out there for people to purchase, as well as the data collection for emergency managers and researchers to capture.
So this would be for governments, basically, emergency management departments. So
It could also be for schools. So like what Japan is doing with theirs. So it could be state and local emergency managers. But some of the bigger emergency not bigger, but there's also private sector emergency managers that would like something like this. So, some of your big companies, Walmart, BP Oil, they all have emergency managers, right? The other might be nonprofits. We know a lot of community-based organizations are actually the ones who help individuals and households understand their risk. They do a train the trainer with emergency managers, and then they're responsible for showcasing to other people. And they tend to do it by workshops as well. And this could be another add-on where it's a workshop plus the virtual reality experience. So there've been a number. We've followed a couple of places around Texas. They have a trailer that they've been taking around, not just Texas, I guess all the way through the West Coast and then into Texas. And it's an earthquake trailer. So someone is making a simulated environment as an earthquake, so you know what that feels like. And they're putting people inside of the trailer, which is set up like a living room, and giving you the experience of an earthquake and then telling you what to do about it as the same kind of thing. Getting you to understand what's happening with your preparedness so that you remember, oh no, I remember what that felt like. I remember what I'm supposed to do, and giving you that muscle memory that you didn't have before.
Curious, just to go back to his question, you've compared the virtual reality to a game, a flat screen game.
No, other researchers who have done this for disaster research, they have done that and they've already showcased that it was better. We have not done that with ours.
Just wondering, 'cause
Significant, where it was significant. Yeah, significantly.
one is
above.
clearly more available. People are
Yes.
available, the equipment.
So that was the other thing. We are moving towards the space of being able to offer it just for accessibility features, because doing the 2D game is still better than just the workshop alone. Mm-hmm.
Interactive element makes a big difference.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
So we're seeing much more of climate change and all these natural disasters. I feel like I didn't hear when this would be available to the regular person. Where something like this would be something that our kids are practicing on, or we are, so that when this happens,
Mhm.
X, we know what to do.
So that's where our company comes in. So that's something that takes it outside of the research space and moves it into the commercialization space. And that's one of the reasons that we've had so much support to move towards that space. We did was it last October, I believe it was, there was a research week for the campus. Part of that, they had the Innovation Center did a pitch week so that all the researchers that have some technology that they need to pitch to venture capitalists. And then they had it as a competition. And our thing won second place, in which that came with some funds to help us to start up our company. So it is moving in the space. Depends on how many, I mean, I think it depends, we're literally not even a month old. So it's kind of hard to say. We haven't figured out a trajectory. It would be lovely if we could have this out in a year, but that's pushing it, if I'm being honest. Until we start to have the money to actually hire people, right now we're just getting started. And then that's a whole separate thing that has nothing